simulation. Okay, let's accept this one. So again, today I'm going to be speaking to you about introduction to adversarial simulation, and I hope that you will learn about this concept, and of course would love to expand it with you afterwards if you have any follow-up questions. So let's kick it off. So a little bit about myself. My name is Itzik Kotler, but please feel free to call me Isaac. I've been in information security for the past 15 years. I've done a variety of different jobs, anything from doing pen testing, exploit development, leading teams of security research, until today. Basically 8 years ago, I co-founded a company called SafeBreach, and I'm acting as the CTO, Chief Technology Officer. In my resume, there's a lot of security conferences that I've been presented in the past, but I'm very excited to be here for the second time. So thank you very much, Nan, for inviting me for the second time to give a guest lecture as part of this virtual cybersecurity externship. So again, hope that you would like my presentation and you'll learn something today. So instead of trying to kind of, having the dry approach to adversarial simulation, I want to start with something that worked very well for me in the previous time. So hopefully it will work as well this time too. And that's just a question. And again, please feel free to participate. This is an interactive part. And I'm going to give you about a minute here once I'm going to set up the stage to show you exactly what the question is. So over here, we can see a very simplified, I would say, diagram. You have computer A on the left, you have computer B on the right. And then you have a firewall in between, a very basic standard security control. And the question is, a malware on computer A managed to propagate to computer B. Why? So take a minute and think about why do you think computer A managed to attack computer B given the firewall? And feel free to write your answers on the chat. I'll be looking out for those as well. And of course, feel free to also unmute yourself and say it out loud to the group. So let's take a minute here to pause, look at this diagram, and kind of think about it. So we already have a first answer. Cody says, mismanaged ACL rule order. Someone says, Joel says someone gave it permission not to knowing what it is. Okay. And then Robert said, no signature established within the firewall. So there's obviously a lot of questions here or comments, answers about the firewall. That's not the right answer. It's a good answer, but not the right answer for this hypothetical situation. Oh, I see some answers that are coming in are becoming more and more interesting. And so, again, I'll just give a couple more seconds so we can have everybody the chance to write their answers or unmute and say the answer out loud. Both are valid options. But I will say that I've already identified a couple of good answers. Again, all the answers are good ones. This is a very kind of a tabletop exercise. But the ones that I was trying to lead to, I already saw a couple of those. Okay, so some of you have initially assumed, which again, it's a great assumption, that there was a problem with the firewall. And again, problems could be anything from misconfigured firewalls, the rules ordered, all this kind of good stuff. But that was not actually what I was leading with this. And to a bigger end, the adversarial simulation idea, actually the firewall in this case was not effective because computer A had multiple ways to connect to computer B that basically bypassed the firewall. In other words, there was some interconnectivity, and it can be, again, this is a tabletop exercise, so we can pretend it can be anything from a Wi-Fi to a Bluetooth, to maybe there was a multiple network interfaces, and one of those IPs, maybe a VPN, has bypassed the firewall. And this is something that companies, especially the large companies, the complexity of the networks and the connectivity. And again, right now we're talking about the network portion of it, but it can also be said about processes on a computer. This complexity is sometimes hard to theoretically deduce it. There's just going to be so many different situations. One way to understand that will be to go ahead and test it. Not test if the firewall is working, not test if the firewall has the right rules, but test if the unlikely scenario that somehow computer A can bypass computer B, although there's a firewall that by design is supposed to provision traffic to computer B, whether such case can happen in reality. And the people that do it, it's the people that are part of the adversarial simulation concept. So in information security, there's a couple of ways to kind of process the idea of adversarial simulation. We can talk about some themes and colors. We can talk about approach, proactive versus reactive, and of course, risk management. So I think the easiest way to start talking about this is risk management, right? Information security in its essence is risk management. There's never going to be a time where something is going to be 100% secure, although there are times where things can be 0% secure. That's very obvious situation that one can drive to. But again, there's always going to be trade-offs as the business is pushing for different requirements and different needs. Information security is a department of how. How would the business conduct all these operations in a way that it will protect itself? One approach to quantify that risk, and again, it depends between the different companies and the different situations, but if the company doesn't control, let's say, the product, the source code of a product, and it's been given that they need to use a given service or a given product in order to conduct the business, one way is to try to think like the adversary and say, well, if it's known that we need to use appliance X, software Y in order to do business, and it's a common knowledge, and even if it's not a common knowledge for the sake of this discussion, let's try to assess the risk. Let's see what an adversary can do given this software. Maybe there's weakness in it, vulnerabilities. Maybe there's elements of this software that can be abused to do other things. Again, just trying to understand what an adversary, motivated adversary, can do with this will basically help uncover you don't know what you don't know. So just like in the previous example, when we look at the firewall, and kind of like the first answers was assumptions around the firewall's rules or configuration and answers of that nature, those are not necessarily adversarial simulations. There are great tabletop exercise, and they are also great best practice type of approach that should be applied. But again, adversarial simulations comes and says, but maybe, just maybe, at a certain time of the day, there's a VPN that needs to be established between these two computers. And maybe that will be a way to bypass the firewall. So adversarial simulation contributes to risk management and help uncover things that, again, could be missed when we go in with other approaches, which are more auditing, reviewing, and kind of like reassuring assumptions that we already believe in them. There's a great deal in adversarial simulation that has to do with bias, people bias, technology bias. Sometimes you would hear stuff like, oh, this is secure, this is encrypted, this is whatever keywords that maybe a salesperson or someone else will try to echo. But then in reality, there's a commercial reality and commercial limitation to all these technologies and processes. And so adversarial simulation, one of its purposes is to uncover those biases and face them against the reality. And we'll talk in a few minutes here about how this can also be positioned, not just against curiosity, but also against some business goals as well, mainly threat actors that could be associated with the vertical of the company or known to be operating because of different constraints. The second thing I want to talk to you with respect to adversarial simulation is the proactive versus reactive approach, right? So many aspects of information security are reactive in their nature. For instance, we install a firewall, and then we wait for that firewall to generate events. That way, we will know that firewall has triggered, some of our rules has been triggered, and then we can go ahead and investigate. Why did it happen? Maybe some app was misconfigured. Okay, that's benign, we can fix that. Or maybe, just maybe, somebody was doing something they're not supposed to be doing. And now, because our firewall has been triggered, the rules did get triggered and a log has been sent to the SIEM, to the SOC, maybe now we have a reason to investigate what's happened. And so this reactive approach makes sense because there is a lot of security tools and we will configure them to, again, whether there's certain thresholds or a certain policy or certain rules, behaviors. There's a lot of ways to configure the security controls. They will emit events that then will be a call for action for us. And again, this goes to the realm of threat hunters, incident response, SOC, and how the SOC operates at large, getting those events, filter them, investigate them, and etc. And so adversarial simulation is not a reactive action. It's actually the complement action. It's a proactive. We're not waiting for the firewall to send us some events to know that it's time to investigate it. We are assuming the firewall is working, and we want to test to see if the firewall could be in perfect, again, operational capacity, but maybe that firewall, maybe the network has changed. Maybe the computers has other connectivity techniques that are not covered by the firewall. Instead of assuming that the firewall will get triggered when an adversary will try to make a move, we are proactively testing that, checking that assumption. And mind you, this is one of the things that sometimes gets people that are outside of information security a little bit confused, because the firewall could be in a great shape today, and then tomorrow something happens. And that something could be an IT-related thing, like somebody created a new network, somebody put a VPN, somebody added another layer of connectivity, and the same firewall that was in a great shape, in great operational capacity yesterday, is just rendered a little bit more useless with respect to threats. And so as you can see, the proactiveness here is very important because things change all the time. And some of those elements can change the efficiency of the security controls. And again, going back into, you don't know what you don't know. Everybody but the firewall, everybody believed in that firewall, everybody thought that firewall will be there to protect against the breach. But then other stuff happened, network has changed, technology has been deployed, and now the adversary found an easier route to get to the target. So again, adversarial simulation is a proactive approach, while most of security controls and deployment and thinking can be seen as reactive. Now, in the recent years, there has been some colors assigned to different functions in information security. Some of those has merits based on some military concepts like red team and blue team. And the purple team is, as you can guess, is a mixture of the two colors together. So when you mix red and blue, you get purple. Traditionally, the blue team are the defenders. The blue team are the good people that work in every company to make sure that company is safe and secure. These can be a range of different functions, from deploying the security controllers, to configure the security controllers, to monitor the security events. This is the job of the blue team. The blue team are the people that makes companies safe. Now, the idea of the red team, either by an outsourced function, meaning a different company that will conduct the red team, or internally in some companies, and it's been a trend in the recent years, have established an in-house red team. So they are hiring people with that type of skill set, and they retain them within the company. The red team goes and validates the assumption of the blue team. They're basically saying, the company have invested this and this in a protection. Maybe that protection can be a data leakage prevention, a DLP solution. Again, there's a commercial reality. Let's understand how further along that DLP solution gets us. Maybe there is a purpose of buying 2 of them. Maybe there's not purpose of even buying 1 of them. Again, going back to risk management, the red team, through adversarial simulation exercises, trying to evade the DLP, trying to hack the DLP, trying to do different things, and there's obviously a scope of engagement that needs to be agreed here. It doesn't mean they get the permission to, for instance, take a hammer and smash the appliance, which obviously will render it useless. But the idea here is that that red team is acting on behalf of the company to try to uncover some biases, some limitations, and then return the information back to the business. And now the business, again, going back to risk management, which is key here, because again, information security is risk management. Now the business can make decisions. Now, as we will go through the presentation, I'll give more examples. It is true to say that the red team could use TTPs, techniques, tools, and procedures that could be associated with a threat level that the company is not facing. For instance, let's say that the red team is acting like a state nation. Well, not every company is facing a nation state that's trying to hack it. Not every company is willing to invest money that match such a threat group. And that's okay. Again, in this case, the exercise could unveil what the company knew. But then for the other cases where the company did invest for certain threat actors, and again, double clicking on what it means, it could be anything from a ransomware group that is known to frequent the company's vertical. So again, if we're talking about a hypothetical situation where there's a company in the health services, a hospital, for instance, so there's known threats there's known adversaries, cyber criminal groups that are trying to hack into hospitals that are known to frequent that type of vertical, then it will be fair or reasonable to expect the red team to try those TTPs, to try to act like these bad adversaries and see whether the companies manage to detect or mitigate them. So as you can see, the red team is that their function is to validate the assumptions, and the blue team, again, in a very asymmetrical relationship here, does a lot more. Again, deploying, configuring, monitoring, training. There's obviously harder job on the blue team. Now, the purple team, this invention that happened in the recent years is come to mix or to balance some of these efforts. Again, remember, all of these teams, red, blue, purple, they all work for the benefit of the company. They all work for the benefit of risk management. Nobody here is winning if the other side is losing. And so even when those exercises do happen, at the end, there is a session where knowledge is being shared, information is being passed. And again, it all goes back into improving the company's security posture. The purple team is augmenting the blue team with some offensive knowledge, meaning they're no longer just observing the logs, they're no longer just being reactive, they also have some sort of proactiveness capabilities. And those could be, for instance, using technologies like breach and attack simulations, scanners, different types of inventory tools to engage with the company, with the company's infrastructure, and test it in order to understand if their security controls and the current configuration is configured correctly. And we'll talk a little bit about this later in the presentation of some of the outcomes that adversarial simulation is giving back to the company. And so as time goes by, the trend right now seems that purple team is something that more and more companies are inspired to create, to build, which means they're looking for people that can think both in offensive terms and defensive terms. And again, that gives a great power because then the people can basically self-diagnose the company. They can run more exercise. and they can apply that knowledge quicker when it comes to defending the company. So let's talk a little bit about some of the outputs that adversarial simulations exercises and engagements. And again, here I'm using it in a very synonymous way with red team engagement. So adversarial simulation or red team engagements can give as an output to the company. So the first example is misconfigured security controllers. And while it may sound very shallow or simple, think about complex companies. Think about complex companies that have anything of the above. And the above can be hybrid infrastructure, some cloud, some on-prem. Think about companies that has IoT or OT environments, meaning some of them have normal IT, Windows, Linux, Mac, and the other aspect of the company could be manufacturing equipment. Again, going back with the example of a hospital, for instance, the hospital might operate equipment that's not necessarily connected through the IT. Mining companies, manufacturing facilities, those would have manufacturing facilities and locations that would use machinery. Those are not necessarily connected to the IT. In most cases, they will not. They will have their own OT network with their own even set of protocols. And so as companies are buying security controls and using their risk management to reduce the attack by deploying it on strategic endpoints like the CEO or the database administrator, or using firewalls to create different types of security zones. Again, a very common approach these days, all the way to zero trust. One of the things that today has been discussed by the industry. How can zero trust be implemented? All of those are relying on security controls, and those can become misconfigured at any given point in time. Now, do take into consideration that a misconfiguration could not be just a fact of a human error. It could very well be that the adversary hacked the company and as part of the breach has lowered the security controls policies or measurements in order not to be detected. So again, the idea here is that regardless of what's the motivation or the reason that the controller becomes misconfigured, adversarial simulation can help uncover that bias, can help uncover that fact, and then help the companies understand which junctions, networks, or endpoints could be exposed. And again, we're going to talk a little bit further down about what exposure means in terms of business and threats. But right now, let's just call it exposure to a breach or exposure to a security incident. Another output of adversarial simulations could be, again, different ways that networks can be connected that, again, the company has not foreseen. Again, when breaking down complexity to individual computers, it might be very easy to account for Wi-Fi's and VPNs and Bluetooth and honestly, all different ways that connection can be made. But again, scaling out, looking at a complex company that has multiple offices, including offshore offices, looking at third parties vendors, third parties contractors. Some of them may get access to the company through a VPN. Others may have laptops issued by the company that grants them access. To understand at any given time how everything is connected is not a very simple task to have or to do. Not to mention again that things can be in a great shape today, and then tomorrow through a business decision or an IT decision, things can change in a second. Again, here I'm going to talk a little bit about the cloud environments. So obviously cloud is being a strong leading infrastructure choice for many companies. And there is a lot of reasons. Some of it has to do with the financial side, others has to do with the type of availability and API that clouds offers that traditional infrastructure does not offer. And so with 2 clicks of a button, companies today can create new networks, new data centers in multiple geolocations, which benefits their business, benefits their customers, Essentially benefits everybody. But then again, as those companies scale out their business, it's not always going to be following by scaling out by hiring more security people or by hiring more IT people to oversee it. So again, there is this asymmetrical ratio where things can explode or scale out in a second, but then the risk and the understanding of how safe it is, it's not there. And so again, adversarial simulation, when there is a situation of, again, multiple networks, multiple islands, can uncover some of this connectivity that could be, again, a mistake, a human error, or could be just something that the adversary done to make their life easier. The third output is that sometimes everything works as expected. I mean, we began by discussing security controls, and then we kind of zoomed out to talk a little bit about the networks, the lay of the land, so to speak. But then there could be also many ways, many malfunctions that could be associated with the in-between. And the in-between could be, for instance, that there is the right controller in the right place. However, the logs are not being sent to the SOC. And that's a very critical component to understand. As companies create security operations center, SOCs, and most of them are inspiring, if not follow the sun model, which means there's going to be a pair of eyes looking at the screen at any given point in time in the day. Usually those types of security operations centers are operating in more than one country. So when the sun sets in one country, the other one basically gets to the control and they're becoming the active entity. So again, think about a combination between Singapore, US, and other countries where the time zone is not overlapping by much. And so the company can get always the promise that somebody will go over the events. But then the logs are an important component here. And there are places and there are times where logs were not being sent. It could be broken routing. So that particular device is not able to send the logs. It could be misconfiguration on the analyst side. Maybe some of the rules right now are ignoring those logs. There could be a variety of reasons why the logs will not be sent or received. And so again, adversarial simulation, not taking those things as granted, not operating under the assumption that this is the case. They're going ahead and they will try to trigger. Again, as they're doing their bidding, they will try to trigger some security controls, get through them if possible. And then if at the lesson learned, the conclusion was that at this particular point in time in the network or the attack chain, logs were supposed to be sent, that could be a great output why those logs never arrived or why those logs were never processed by the analysts. And before I'm going to move on to the legacy assumption, I will make another reference here, the security controllers. So it is true that technology in security has done great to advance the capabilities of the companies and how secure they are. However, technology has its limitations. Well, at least according to today, it has its limitations. And so almost always in complex situations, there's going to be a possible false positive, which means something is not quite malicious, but also could potentially be just not fitting the baseline. And so in those cases, the human element step in. The analyst at the SOC, he or she will be observing the behavior, observing the logs, and could make a decision. The decision could very well be, this is an anomaly, and because of the context, which can be outside of the computer. For instance, something happened on a holiday that there is a reason to believe the company is not active. And for instance, something happens on one of the computers that should not happen. This is something that an analyst can easily deduce. Computers, not so much. Well, again, at least for today. And so in those cases, the adversarial simulation, while it can help uncover misconfigured security controls, it's also a great exercise and a great training tool for the SOC analysts. And as I said in my previous slides, the combination of the purple team, which is what many companies today aspire to, is to get that offensive mindset in the SOC analysts. So they, when they would look on the alerts, they won't just see dry data points like computer ABC done AB, but they will also try to pretend what an adversary will gain from doing such actions, or what those actions can lead into, given that it's indeed malicious. So again, Luxby not saying it's a technical problem, but also an analyst that he or she doesn't have the muscle memory and the playbook to respond to those events, it also could be a problem for the company. And so last but not least, we're going to the legacy assumptions. And again, those might sound like something that could be easily uncovered, but in big complex companies, legacy is and probably will be always an issue. So let's talk about legacy and what does it mean. So many different companies, in order to support contracts or business, or just, again, what they need to do in order to survive as a business, may have different product lines. Those product lines may require different technology adaptation. So think about the business that might need to support an earlier version of Windows because their customers doesn't willing to upgrade their Windows. Think about businesses that are doing businesses with multiple countries, and again, cannot get those countries to use the latest and greatest. And so in a case where legacy exists, or multiple product lines or multiple services exist, sometimes some of those legacy assumptions, as it comes with the name, may reduce or make their security, or alternatively, would make things more vulnerable. So I'll give you a quick example here to ground things a little bit further. So there is obviously multiple ways to transfer files these days between computers. Most of the modern protocols that has to do with transferring a file will be encrypted. So we can talk about things like SCP, Secure Copy File, that is utilizing SSH protocol, for instance. We can talk about SFTP and FTPS, which are utilizing also encryptions, in some cases also certification, digital certificates. But then we can also talk about a very basic way, which is like an FTP. The file transfer protocol, FTP, by default is a very old protocol. It's a very early days protocol for the internet, and it doesn't offer much security out of the box. And so, for instance, having an FTP open to the world, because that's the way a company does business with another company, is something that could still be seen these days. But then again, as things do become more modernized, and FTPs, as an example, is getting less and less used, it's not always clear that all the security exceptions and the security bypasses that were created by design to support that product line will be revoked and removed. And so this could be a very well a case of a firewall that still supports FTP as an outbound protocol, but honestly should not, because the business is no longer using FTP. And again, adversarial simulations, either acting on their own original ideas or as part of mimicking a known threat actor, may be trying to utilize that protocol, may be trying to challenge some of those legacy assumptions that, again, could potentially might not be relevant anymore, but still exist in some security controls or infrastructure. They could try to use this to bypass some of the security restrictions. And this is a very interesting concept because, again, as we're looking at big companies that sometimes could not operate with the latest and greatest, legacy comparing to modern technology still poses some security threats. And so many of those businesses will make different networks, will try to isolate and basically reduce the potential risk, the residual risk that could carry from one security zone to the other. And like I said, when sometimes the business transform, sometimes those are no longer the problem. In those cases, legacy assumptions might still reside in security controllers in people's mind, and adversarial simulation can flesh out that bias, that protocol use, that particular routine that may people already accept or take as granted, but honestly should not. So if I had to summarize the value of adversarial simulation, it would be a very interesting concept called predictive prevention, right? All security controls by nature, well, not all, most of them, I should be saying, are designed to provide detection and mitigation capabilities. Again, thinking all the way from the common firewall to a common antivirus or an EDR, those are in the realm of detecting and mitigating threats. But as we talked about it earlier, their mode of operation is still very much reactive. And so in this case, what we want to do is we wanted to achieve the same prevention layer, the same prevention concept, but in a proactive manner, hence predictive prevention. So in order to understand predictive prevention, let's talk right now, let's do a shift from the how, which is, again, the techniques that could be done, and talk about the who. Not the red team as the who, but who the red team are trying to mimic. So as you saw so far, and hopefully understood, adversarial simulation is a concept, is an idea. It's thinking opposite to what other people may think, and then uncover those biases. There could be tabletops, which is something that I've done with you earlier in this presentation when I gave you the diagram, but most adversarial simulation take place in a real or close to real environment in order to uncover real technological findings, or in some cases also human gaps. Now, the TTPs, tool techniques and procedures, which is basically the breakdown of what the red team is going to do. For instance, phishing is a TTP. Lateral movement through credentials on a machine is a TTP. Those are examples of ways that adversaries work. Now, there could be, again, in a very simplified manner, two ways to look at the problem. Either the red team is trying to mimic a known threat actor, or in this case, the red team can try to think out of the box. And there's very good examples or very good arguments for both of those modus operandi. So let's talk about the first one, known threat actors. So one of the things that I want to highlight is that today there is a great free resource that's called the Mitre attack framework. And if you have not Googled this or not visited that website, you should. It's a great free resource that basically took a list of known threat actors, anything from, again, Russia, China, North Korea, and also cyber criminal activities, known cyber games, so to speak, and have sliced and diced the way those attack campaigns basically took place. So the Mitre attack gives a sequential flow that explains what happened for a given attack campaign. Now, it's a very valuable knowledge for two main purposes. A, it obviously contains things that still, in some cases, may be applicable as detection rules, specific file names, specific behaviors, things that could be translated into alerts, into policies, into, again, detection capabilities. And again, this is where threat hunting and other functions like IR comes in and utilize this knowledge as part of their investigation, as well as part of their understanding of the problem. But it also gives tools and knowledge for the red teams for their adversarial simulation. So for instance, let's say that a company is looking at a particular cyber threat group. For instance, the Maze ransomware that wreaked havoc about 1.5 years ago and still do to some degree. Thinking about this ransomware, these threat groups, how do they get in? What do they do once they get in? How do they get out? This could be very valuable for companies that says, our number one threat is ransomwares. We do not want to be targeted by ransomwares. Well, that's nice to say, but in reality, no one can actually get that guarantee. But now that we've studied the top 3 ransomware groups or gangs that are attacking our industry, we want to continuously know that we're not affected by them. Well, one of the ways to do it is running red team campaigns that mimics the same TTPs. So for instance, if we know that part of their modus operandi is to use email, then the red team campaigns will include different types of emails. And you can imagine those could be emails in different languages, emails that have been sent to different people, emails that may involve some inside information, like for instance, sending an email to a person, referencing another person in the company to build credibility. Obviously, there is ways to perfect this or to evolve this as the company is trying to understand the boundary, but nonetheless, as the companies is looking to understand how well they're shaping up against the threat group, the Mitre attack framework offers for most of the known threat actors out there some of their campaigns, and that knowledge can be utilized as part of adversarial simulation. The other side of the spectrum is many times a company could have things that are proprietary to its own business. And again, we can think about anything from their own operation system, their own software, their own hardware. I mean, many different types of businesses may have some ad hoc or tailor-made software, hardware, or even businesses processes that no one has explored before, or in other words, there is no out-of-the-box solution to validate their security. In that case, the red team will do the job of learning, studying these technologies, studying these business processes for the purpose of acting as an inside threat. And an inside threat is basically means that one of the employees of the company is trying to hack the company. And again, unfortunately, those are not as rare as people think. And unfortunately, in times of financial crisis, like for instance, what happened during the COVID pandemic, the early days of it, that has been affected some industries, there were reported cases of employees trying to basically blackmail the business as a way to get the money. So there is always the assumption that even when a company has a proprietary something, and again, something here is operation system, a software, a hardware, someone will know about this. And then if somebody will know about this, somebody can perhaps then use it to abuse it, to hack the company. So again, in this case, the red team will do their own original type of engagement. They will take all that has been offered to them, and they will do anything from reverse engineering to social engineering to brute forcing to invent new techniques and tools, all as part of an adversarial simulation. And the threat level that will be assigned to it will be what would happen if a group of threat actors, if again, a nation state or this particular cyber group will get evolved and they will try to target us. Will it still be possible? And so, as you can see, when we talk about adversarial simulation, beside the technology aspect of it and the process aspect of it, the business value, going back to the risk management, is what are the TTPs that are being utilized in the adversarial simulations? Are they original or are they part of known threat actors? And of course, it's not an exclusive. At times, red teams or adversarial simulations could be done on the original basis. Again, looking at the company and all its different assets, trying to learn something unique and new and pave their way in. Other times, they may be asked to mimic existing threat actors because business, compliance, or otherwise outside pressure is asking for a validation against those threats actors. When you do it long enough, when adversarial simulation is becoming something that you specialize, one of the interesting insights and also some of the fundamental assumptions that the Mitre attack took and very successfully demonstrated is that hacker playbooks are rarely 100% unique. So again, if you look on the big campaigns, the big APTs, advanced persistent threats, there's obviously 0 days and exploits and things that were not known before. And that makes sense. That would probably be the entry points for most of those campaigns, if not all of them. But then once the adversary is already inside the network, well, from that position, although innovation is possible and things are constantly being discovered, the amount of techniques to go from one computer to the other becomes more limited. And it becomes more limited from 2 basic facts. One is that the adversary can only operate in the playground that he or she has access to. For instance, if you took a network and only limited to one protocol, it doesn't matter what the adversary wants to use. It doesn't matter what the adversary had in mind. Well, matter of fact is that all the traffic is being filtered to a single protocol. Now, is it realistic? No. But the idea here is to emphasize that the adversary doesn't control the playground. The playground is being dictated by the company and by whatever the company has configured, security-wise and IT-wise. But then again, going back into, we have Windows, we have Linux, we have Mac, we have very typical known is the adversary can achieve those technologies, can buy in advance those types of hardware and software, and see what ways could 2 Windows computers can be connected. Anything from remote desktop, RDP, to share folders. These are all valid ways to get files transferred, as well in some cases, control transferred between 2 computers. The idea that those techniques are shared, and again, the emphasis here is shared through different campaigns, means that there is a very big value in simulating those. Again, because there is just so many ways that 2 Windows computers can connect to each other. Again, and in a given network environment, in a given company environment, because this is a very finite selection of techniques, using them as part of adversarial simulation is contributing to the predictive part of it. Meaning, even if we don't know how the adversary will get in, knowing that the adversary is always using A, B, or C, or more likely, it has been shown that by now, the adversary is using A, B, C, simulating those can contribute to the predictability, the detectability, and obviously the mitigation of future threats coming from this threat group. And so over here, we achieve something new. It's no longer assuming that we will detect the adversary based on some static rules or some reusing of the hacker artifacts, like using the same ransomware over and over. It's literally isolating the behavior and then testing for this behavior, knowing that once we got it covered, and it's always easier to zoom in than to zoom out when it comes to security controls and investment, we can then have some predictability. Now, without going into too much of a discussion about whether it's better to go for the uniqueness of the attacks versus the common shared techniques, it is important to mention that anytime that you have a threat information, which means a good inputs on how a particular threat actor is operating, it's king. It's better than not knowing anything. Not knowing anything leaves you in a big complexity with many different logs, and there's not a basically a beginning, an entry point to investigate anything. But then timely threat information is King Kong, which means it's better to have the threat information as close as to the threat is possibly happening. Again, it's not always possible, and companies are doing a lot to acquire this data. Again, without going into names and details, but threat intelligence, cyber threat intelligence teams, CTIs, there's many different functions that are trying to obtain this information and pass it into the business. Now, obviously, again, as we talked about, the initial assumption will be, let's use it for reactive purposes, which is great, but then passing it into a proactive function like red team and adversarial simulation immediately can help answer the question, how safe are we from this threat? And this is what I wanted to emphasize here as we talked about predictive prevention. It doesn't mean, or we don't need to wait for the attack to happen. We don't need to rely on our controllers to create those events in real time, and then it will be us chasing the adversary. We can make the cycle happen earlier by using those TTPs, weaponizing them, and then testing the company's posture. Well, we have discussed today a little bit about what adversarial simulation is. We talked a little bit about what does the outcome of it, why do we need it versus other functions, how can it align with the business from a threat modeling perspective and outputs, and of course, the value proposition, which is predictive prevention, helping to answer the company how safe the company from a threat before the threat actually happens. And so, given how much time is allowed by Nan and others, we will open it for questions.
We'll do it up until 7:58. So we have a little bit, but Andrew, you have your hand up?
Yes. So is adversarial simulation only specific to people who are hired as red teamers in an organization? Is it specifically tied to a role like a cyber threat analyst? Like, how can we apply this adversarial simulation concept to when we join a security team in an organization?
It's a great question. So first and foremost, I would say that it's a type of thinking. It's a type of thinking that would be appreciated in many different forms, raising questions such, what if it doesn't work that way? What if there's other ways? And of course, with time and experience, and again, there are certain roles that are associated, red teams are being hired to fill that function. But as I said, the trend of purple team is a trend that many companies are investing in the employees in different blue team functions, educate them, training them, exposing them to these types of knowledge and experience, so they can either pivot to become a red team in the future, or bring some of this engagement and thinking to their own function. Meaning you may not be a red teamer per se, but whenever it comes to your function and your job, you can suggest certain active engagements or proactive engagements to utilize this type of thinking.
Una?
So I have a question regarding where you said timely threat information is like the best case scenario.
Yes.
So attackers are like increasing, like every single day they're coming up with like new ways to like breach security. What's the best way for somebody to stay like up to date? Like, how do you continuously keep learning how to, like, I guess, mitigate certain like risks or how to respond to certain threats?
Sure. So Mitre attack framework is one of the most quality, free, open source ways that you can learn about the latest threats and educate yourself about past ones, because as we said, the past has a lot of meaning because of certain engagement or certain situation has a finite amount of choice. But I would say at large, companies has, well, not all of them, but there are certain roles like CTI cyber threat intelligence, where this is essentially the job. The job is to get threat intelligence feeds, read them over, understand them, summarize them, and operationalize them around the company. So companies do invest money to get that kind of advantage or to keep up to date. So one element is to be part of those operations. And the other is to obviously, again, use open source intelligence, which can be anything from Twitter to LinkedIn to websites like the Mitre attack to get the latest and greatest updates.
Thanks so much. Kaveh?
Yeah, so I had a question about the blue team, red team stuff. So would it be helpful to learn like blue teaming skills before learning red teaming skills, or vice versa? And what certifications do you recommend to get started with the learning process?
So it's a very good question. There's obviously many different avenues to look at that. I would say that blue team and red team knowledge complement each other. So knowing how to configure a firewall doesn't necessarily get you to be the best in bypassing a firewall, but obviously understanding how a firewall works can get some ideas about perhaps some limitations or perhaps some common mistakes that could happen. So there's definitely this synergy. And again, you don't need to necessarily know how to configure a firewall to read about techniques and tools and ways that one can evade the firewall. So again, the beginning usually, again, in my personal career, red team came earlier, but again, people have been transitioned and will transition between those two paths as long as there is the will to learn new stuff. And as I said, purple team is an active trend that companies are investing and educating the blue team and supplement their ideas or tools that are being more offensive, more reddish. Now, again, I don't want to endorse any certifications or companies here. So all I'm going to say is that a lot of the knowledge, at least the basic knowledge, exists for free on the internet, not always in the best quality, not always the most self-explanatory, but a lot of it exists on the internet. And then there are certain companies and there are certain institutes that have specialized in particular techniques and particular operation systems. And if it makes sense, those can also be used to supplement the knowledge or get a more formal recognition of that particular skill.
Thank you.
Awesome. It's like one last question that I've been asking all the employers. If
Sure.
you were an extern or you're an extern in this program right now, what would you be doing, or can you give advice to the extern how they can leverage this externship for their benefit?
So I think the first thing is to be aware of this concept. I hope that today what you took from this is that in whatever your next job or current job in InfoSec is or will be, thinking like the adversary has merits. Asking questions that nobody is thinking about is a good practice in information security because it's risk management. Second of all, if you do feel like this is something that you would like it to be your day job, if you do like breaking more than building or securing, again, it's all for the purpose of securing, obviously, then you can definitely use Mitre attack and other free resources on the internet to learn more about this. And I think that in many cases, having a way to talk about this, prove this knowledge to your future employer can go a long way. So knowing the right trends, recognizing the right resources could get you closer to have this as your job.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's like, would you be able to unshare your screen and could we take a
Sure.
picture with you?
Yep.
So let me stop recording.